Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Hongkongggag Podcast. I've here with me today James. Say hi, James.
Everyone.
And James today we're going to be discussing about British politics and how it relates to Hong Kong and China as a whole. So, James, why don't you start off by introducing the political parties of the UK, because I'm sure not everyone would know a lot about British politics.
All right. So the political system in the UK is based on the Westminster system, after which takes its name from Westminster Palace in London, where the House of Commons and the House of Lords assemble to debate the matters of the day. The two dominant political parties in the UK aren't too dissimilar from the ones in the United States, the Republicans and the Democrats. In this case, you have the Conservatives, who are obviously the Conservatives, on the right wing of the political spectrum, and then you have Labour, who are on the left wing of the political spectrum. And governments usually switch between the two, although the Conservatives they're on a winning streak of I think 4 consecutive elections by now. So they're definitely the primary dominant political party in the UK. And then, unlike the US, you have the presence of several smaller political parties within the country as a whole, which represent otherwise specific issues or take a mix of the two, such as the Liberal Democrats or the Scottish Nationalist Party, which have both been gaining popularity in recent years. So that's an overview of the British political spectrum. The Conservatives are the ones currently in government right now, with Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister, and I believe the Foreign Secretary. I believe that's... I forgot. Sorry. But yes, the Conservatives...
Don't worry about it.
Boris Johnson's the man of the hour.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was looking online and noticed that there is also a party within the Liberal Party called the Cooperative Party. Do you have anything to say about them, or are they mostly just intertwined with the Labours?
Again, one shouldn't really be concerned about the lesser parties, lesser third parties in Parliament. It's mainly the Conservatives and Labour which are the primary focus of British politics. Although I will say that nationalist parties in particular, like the SNP and I believe and the several nationalist parties in Northern Ireland, for example, have been gaining much more popularity in the wake of Brexit. So, and we're actually looking forward to to segue off topic, we're actually looking for the independence and nationalist movements are getting stronger within the rest of the UK. I'm not sure if you're just to clarify for the audience, the UK is made up of 4 constituent countries, and nationalist movements in these countries have gotten more popular due to Brexit. So you might see a resurgence in the popularity of these nationalist-based third parties. But other than that, these other political parties don't necessarily warrant much discussion. They're not going to be able to. They're likely never going to have a role in the government of the UK, and so they don't really have the time and opportunity to develop coherent foreign policies, which relate to the geopolitical issues of the day, like China and such and such.
Oh yeah. So yeah, we have like a very similar power balance in the UK, like between a more conservative side and a more kind of liberal side, with like Conservative Party and the Labour Party respectively. Are there, like in the US, a lot of people say that the Republicans favor Hong Kong more, but it's been shown that this isn't the case, and it's very much more bipartisan. Like both parties are quite anti-China, or should I say anti-CCP. I was wondering, in the UK, is there a party that favors more Hong Kong, like favors it's more against China than the other, or is it more bipartisan like in the US?
It's quite complicated. I wouldn't want to say that both parties are. How should I put this? Okay, let's take Boris Johnson, for example. He has quite an inconsistent policy on China. Right now, as I'm sure you're aware, the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's essentially primary international infrastructure project to promote trade and global development. They're essentially planning to invest in the UK quite a bit. And so Boris Johnson is quite incentivized by that. When he first became Prime Minister, he openly said in an interview with Phoenix Television, my government, as in the government that he will form as a part of Parliament, will be very pro-China. Verbatim, that's what he said. My government will be very pro-China. So obviously that's quite alarming, which would make you think that, okay, yes, Boris Johnson's obviously got to be quite pro-China then. And his early actions as Prime Minister certainly supported that assessment. Obviously, there was a massive scare relating to Huawei and their development of 5G technologies, which was banned by the United States and some countries in the European Union. And the United Kingdom was one of the few countries to not follow through with a ban on Huawei. They independently assessed that Huawei was not a security threat. Make of that what you will, but many interpreted this as Boris Johnson being quite soft on China. But since then, his policy has evolved. He engaged in some rhetoric which some interpreted as racist when the coronavirus first started to emerge from China. And he also obviously adopted a policy of allowing BNO passport holders in Hong Kong to have a 5-year path to residency through immigrating to the UK, which would obviously stand to be quite supportive of the position that his government is taking quite a hard line on China. But other than that, it's strange. Johnson can be described as both pro and anti-China, depending on how you choose to look at his government's policies and perspectives. Obviously, he goes through the same motions as other Western politicians, but his actions will obviously speak much louder than words. So it's quite difficult to assess how Johnson wishes to essentially. It's difficult to assess the stance that Johnson will take on China throughout his term as a whole. On the other hand, Sir Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, has consistently criticised China over and over and over again for their human rights record, both in Hong Kong and in Xinjiang. And it really shows. I think a lot of people will be able to support Starmer on this hard line against China. It's quite ironic, I think, that left-wing politicians are far more likely to take a hard line, in terms of rhetoric at least, against China, especially given that, of course, China is ostensibly a communist country on the far left of the political spectrum. I found it ironic.
I'm just gonna stop you right there because it's fine. China really isn't that communist anymore. Apart from
yes,
big
of
corporations
course.
owned by the state, it's almost entirely communist in name. Like, obviously, you have some communist institutions left over from the Mao era, but like these aren't really prevalent anymore. So
yeah, sorry. I put air quotes over communist. That's my bad.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, sorry. Most economists have described China as it's ironic. China is closer to classical fascism today than it is actual communism ever. You have a nationalistic government with which adopts very, very corporatist economic policies with a market-based economy. So make of that what you will. I've always found it quite ironic. There's a running joke. If Chiang Kai-shek walked the streets of Shanghai, he'd be nodding in approval, while Mao would be, rolling around in his mausoleum.
Yeah, I just feel like it's very interesting how hypocritical the Chinese government, not China, I should say, the Chinese government is, and this shouldn't come to a surprise because if you are on the left wing, if you truly embody leftist ideas, you should not be supporting, the Chinese Communist Party because they're basically communists in there. And I'm not trying to defend, Mao, of course. Like Mao was also terrible, but how should I say this? Pardon?
You have 100 billionaires, I think, who are currently in the National People's Congress. So that should tell you really all you need to know.
Yes, what I'm trying to say, I don't think China is, can really handle, like, it is very close to fascism, like with, things like, social programs, like kind of like, make people like more happy, like, trying to kind of like scapegoat an enemy, whether it be the Uyghurs, the protesters in Hong Kong, or the West, or, South Korea and Japan. They do this, and of course we can't ignore what's happening in the Uyghur region and compared to the Holocaust. Like, it is very scary, and I think it's scary with the advance of modern technology. But back to the UK. So you mentioned that Boris Johnson kind of like flips his policy to China a lot, and do you think he's taking a very businessman approach to China? Like Trump, for example, he took a businessman approach to China. Like when it benefited him, he supported Hong Kong. Like kind of. But when it doesn't benefit him, he could really care less. Do you think the same can be said for Boris Johnson?
You see, Boris Johnson's early policies do make it quite difficult. Obviously, he's as Prime Minister of the UK. His foreign policy is going to be influenced quite a lot by his domestic policy. As I'm sure you're aware right now, the UK is suffering its worst period of economic growth since 1709, over a period of 300 years. And right now, of course, the UK has left the European Union, the world's largest single common market. And so he, based on his stances in China, based on his previous support of China and the Belt and Road Initiative, I think you should expect to see him warm up to China. You should start to warm up to China and pursue perhaps closer relations with them. Right now, China are Germany's largest trading partner. So I think that under a Johnson administration in the future, we may see him pursue closer ties to China in the means of promoting free trade, perhaps a new economic deal. Some have discussed free trade agreements with the Trans-Pacific Partnership already, and I don't see why he wouldn't do the same with China. Obviously, it's going to enrage some people, but he is going to have to make that choice, essentially, of what he thinks is best for his country. And it is sad that cheap Chinese exports are just too attractive to some of these governments. One example is, of course, I think, let's go back to Germany and discuss how China is their largest trading partner. I'm not sure if you or your audience have heard in the news, but Germany right now are prosecuting a 95-year-old woman for being a secretary at Auschwitz. And I'm thinking that I hope this doesn't come off in a strange way. Of course, I condemn the Holocaust and I condemn what happened at Auschwitz in the strongest possible terms. But Germany says never again, and then something and then a genocide like the Holocaust happens again in Xinjiang. And the only thing the German government says is, the German government is actually verbatim what they said. We express strong concerns over what's happening in Xinjiang. And then they continue to trade with China. And I can't help but think that if Germany could manage to stomach, their decades of national disgrace in exchange for cheap Chinese resources and exports, I can't see why Britain wouldn't do the same thing. So I think that's what's going to happen under this new Johnson administration. He's going to take a warmer stance towards China, perhaps adopt a new free trade deal, and we'll have to see what happens from there.
Yeah, just with the UK, I feel like it's very much virtual signaling in this case, and it is very disappointing to see and of course the UK has done some stuff to help Hong Kong. We cannot forget what they did with the BNOs and letting Hong Kongers more safe access into the UK. Not really safe, but more easy, let's say. I feel like it's very hypocritical of a lot of parliaments keep kind of say we condemn China, then and then right after that continue trading with China and not put sanctions. I get that people that you're scared of China who has a seat on the Security Council, which means it has nukes as well, and B is a country that is not afraid to a country where a lot of people's trade come from, and C has a lot of sympathizers in Western countries. We all know about tankies and a lot of socialists support the Chinese Communist Party unironically. It is something that's very dangerous, and although it's not as big as China have it being on the Security Council, it is something that people should take note of. And I just want to ask you, about Hong Kongers coming to the UK? Just brief side question. How do you think Hong Kongers will settle in the UK? Will they face a lot of immense racism, or will they kind of gradually assimilate like other Asian Americans, specifically Chinese and Hong Kong Americans in the UK?
I think there's going to be a lot of racism. I think it's inevitable. I mean, you see what happened. We're seeing what happens. You've seen what happens essentially 70 years after Britain has left India and given it independence, and you see how much racism there still is in British society towards people of Indian descent, people of Pakistani descent, Bangladeshi descent, and it really shows, even towards people who ostensibly look like, air quotes, look like them, like Polish immigrants who come to the UK looking for work. There is, and you have to also consider how the free movement of European citizens and that xenophobic attitude also contributed towards the Brexit result. A lot of people didn't consider the economic cost of leaving the EU. What they saw was the free movement of citizens, the free movement of across European borders is contributing towards a refugee problem. It's contributing towards people stealing, air quote, stealing our jobs. And so because of that, we're going to vote to leave. And that really shows how powerful these sorts of xenophobic and racist attitudes can be towards other people. I cannot see any reason why these same attitudes would not be extended towards Hong Kongers coming to the UK from Hong Kong. Despite being some of the world's most educated people, despite our history as the most recent, as the last British colonial possession, major British colonial possession, I think this is something that Hong Kongers should consider when going over to the UK. And it's unfortunate, but yes, they would be pretty stupid to not consider racism as a factor that they will be experiencing. But I am confident that we can assimilate. I believe all immigrants inherently have that ability to assimilate culturally, air quote, culturally assimilate into their new home country.
A lot of people say that like with how with the UK's UK's makeup of different ethnic groups. It's kind of like the empire coming back, parts of the empire coming back to the UK, and I feel like it's very interesting that a lot of people it's like kind of like they know that what their country did to these areas was inhumane, and well, even though there was this inhumane treatment of these people, like what we see in the current day is just continuous racism for very little. Like there's no reason for this for it to exist at all, but like you can't help think that they will learn from their mistakes. And unfortunately, I feel a lot of Hongkongers have to be prepared to face racism in the UK. And I was wondering, with the conservative government in power, speaking of which, in 2024 we know there's going to be an election. Do you think the Conservatives will still hold on to power, or will it go to the Labour Party?
I think there's a very, very strong chance that Labour can win in 2024, but 3 years is a long time. I mean, that is a lot of, despite everything, despite all the failings of the Johnson administration so far, the worst economic recession in 300 years, his poor handling of the coronavirus, the failed deal with the EU. Let's face it, that's what it was. All of the promises that Johnson and the Conservative government made in 2015 and 16, leading up to the referendum, have not, for the most part, been met. You remember that big lie printed on that big red bus, £350 million to the NHS.
Oh yeah, that
£350 million to the European Union we can be spending on the NHS. That hasn't happened. But I can't help but think of the comparison with Margaret Thatcher, who in her first premiership endured a particularly poor economic recession in response to her economic policies, which at the time were incredibly unpopular, but eventually contributed towards economic growth. Obviously, we cannot be certain of what happens in 3 years, but I don't know. Perhaps Johnson can pull some miracle out of his back pocket. We can't be sure. I am, of course, still wary of the comparison to Thatcher, what was once an enigmatic figure who is now quite unpopular in Britain, much as how Johnson is seen as quite unpopular today. But we will have to see. We will have to see. I think the British people have quite good memories. I don't think they're going to be ignorant of the lies and the failures of this current premiership. And I think in 2024 we could see the first Labour government in almost, well, by that time it'll have been more than, let me get my math correct, more than 18 years. So we'll have to see. Yeah. If I were Keir Starmer, I'd fancy my chances of being able to kiss the Queen's, or well, maybe the King's signet ring and be invited to form a new government in that year.
You do know that the Queen is immortal, and I think you told this me before, but you are British, like all millions of British are actually faking their accents, and yeah.
I can't comment on that, but I do agree. The Queen is immortal. I mean,
no, you told me that you have to fake your accent, and anyone who hears the true accent has to be killed. Is this true?
I'm sure I made that comment a long time ago. I can't exactly say what.
That was a joke in poor taste. Sorry, I was trying to.
Don't worry about it. Yeah, don't worry about it. I got it. I appreciated it.
Okay, thanks. Feel like let's just drive this back onto topic. So yeah, I feel like, what do you think a Labour government, hypothetically, if they win, what would it look like, and how do you think it could be beneficial for us in Hong Kong?
Well, it's been so long since Labour have been in charge. I will appreciate the opportunity in 2024 to see if Keir Starmer, or if he's still in charge then, can put his money where his mouth is when it comes towards a hard line on China. Let's see if he actually takes some of the steps that other Western governments haven't been able to take, which he can now hopefully do. Well, I think one of the few things we haven't recognised is that because of the common market policies of the European Union, if one country wanted to place sanctions on China or a Chinese government official, the entire bloc as a whole would have to do so. And I think that contributes to why some of these governments might be reluctant to take a hard line on China, as it means the entire bloc will have to do so. But with the thanks to Brexit, I can't believe I'm saying this, thanks to Brexit, the United Kingdom can pursue a more unilateral policy when it comes to rightfully punishing some of these, some of the blatant human rights violations and transgressions done by the Chinese government. So perhaps, yes, I will be looking. I'll be looking forward to seeing if Keir Starmer can put his money where his mouth is. Overall, yeah, we're going to have to see. I don't think I can offer any further commentary than that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we just inadvertently found an actual benefit of Brexit. Like Brexit is infamous for just being just a bureaucratic mess that is just playing to conservative dreams. So yeah, it's gonna be very interesting. Like, and I don't. Do you think that the Labour government would try to get UK back in the EU, or would it stay out of the EU, at least for the time being?
It's a hot button topic. It's been a hot button topic for the past 6 years, and I feel like it's definitely going to be a hot topic for the coming 3 years as people start to experience and realize in the long term what the punishments of Brexit are going to be. But as a whole, I think this is essentially just for good. Brexit was for good. I don't see Britain rejoining the European Union anytime in the future. It's going to be quite poor for national prestige overall for Britain to go through such a lengthy process of leaving the EU and then immediately, a couple of years later, beginning the process to rejoin it again. If Keir Starmer wins in 2024, he should not take that as a referendum on the issue of European Union membership. Ever since the European Union today has its origins in the EECP, I believe it was called, European Union Common Policy. I can't remember the exact abbreviation, but it was essentially an agreement between France, West Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Spain to essentially trade freely between the two. And when Britain initially tried to join, it was refused because Charles de Gaulle, French president at the time, refused it because he realized that Britain, throughout its entire history as a country, has always kept Europe at arm's distance and would never be able to fully integrate itself into Europe as a whole. And that's exactly what happened. He was correct. When the European Union was first formed in 1990, there was Euroscepticism was already quite strong, and it just only continued to grow as membership continued over that 20-year period. So unless Britain changes itself so much that it's willing to fully integrate itself into the European Union, essentially not keeping it at arm's distance anymore, if it's willing to stop keeping the pound, if it's willing to adopt the euro, if it's willing to fully always, unless it's willing to take all those extra steps, I think Britain is never going to be able to rejoin the European Union in the same vein as before. And it's also, Europe also has an incentive to keep Britain out of the EU once it's left, because Europe wants, the European Union, they want to keep themselves together, obviously, perhaps even strengthen the relationship between the European Union government and the rest of the national governments. So it wants the process of leaving the EU and then rejoining it to be as unappealing and as punishing as possible to incentivize countries to stay. So no, I think the British government by itself will never be able to rejoin the EU, even if it wanted to, and the EU would never accept Britain back into its arms in the same way as before, no matter how badly it wants to. So that's my assessment of it.
Yeah, I feel like with like the UK isn't going to be going back to the EU. Like already had a separate identity of using the UK pound, using the British pound, and not being in the Schengen area. Like I know like Ireland, which is closer to the EU, isn't in the Schengen area, but like yeah, I believe it uses the euro, right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, it's like asking, does Ireland use the euro? Because I'm not sure.
The Republic of Ireland do, yes.
Okay, yeah, Ireland does. Like Republic of Ireland. Yeah. So I do not. So with this, I think the UK should play this to their advantage. Like Brexit is just a really fucked up situation, and they should try to like make the best out of it. Don't try to don't make the objective get back in the EU, but how can we pursue friendly relations while also doing the best for the world and standing up to the aggressors. That being China, and let's go back to Hong Kong with our British politics. It relates to Hong Kong. I just wanted to, I've read Chris Patton's memoir called First Confession, and I learned a lot about Chris Patton, who, if you don't know, is the last governor of Hong Kong. For those of you listening, and he was a conservative. Like he was quite liberal, but he was aligned with the Conservative Party. And I was wondering, are there any kind of like more liberal sectors of the Conservative Party who are only there for different reasons? Like perhaps like economic policies, they are with the Conservatives, but maybe they're different on other policies such as foreign policy. Do you believe that there are still people like that in the Conservatives?
Yes, I believe there's a very prominent example of this, as in the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, who, that's essentially a fancy term saying Finance Secretary or Secretary of the Treasury. He's the primary economic minister in the government. He is, for all intents and purposes, quite a liberal person in terms of economic policy. He's been very, very generous with government handouts, and he's already being, despite Johnson only being in charge for about 2 years, he's already being seen as a future figure for prime minister, for the top job, in which he'd be the first Asian to hold the office, which I think will be quite impressive if he manages to pull that off. He does generally have quite socially liberal economic policies, but again, he is a conservative. He's not going to be pushing for full employment policies. He's not going to be expanding the welfare state as a whole. He's probably going to, while most conservatives favour privatising aspects of the NHS, he hasn't fully established his own independent stance on that. So I'd be looking forward to that in the future to see what his primary stances are. But yeah, overall, he does have quite social liberal policies for a conservative. If you're looking for somebody who will expand the welfare supports and social safety nets in the UK, you should probably vote Labour if that's really what you're looking for. But in terms of actual social policies, the Conservatives as a whole are, for the most part, very socially liberal. It was the Conservative government in 2015 or 2014, sorry, which introduced legislation to legalise same-sex marriage. Boris Johnson himself is an open supporter of LGBT rights. He's an open supporter of reproductive rights for women. So you'd have to be hard-pressed to find somebody who adopts those more conservative social policies on top of those conservative economic policies. The one that comes to mind is Jacob Rees-Mogg, leader of the House of Commons currently, and he is quite draconian for British politics, openly against same-sex rights, openly against reproductive rights. He's everything that you don't really want in this sort of socially liberal society. He's the epitome of that British upper-class conservative of whom the Conservative Party appeals to. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Sorry, your audio kind of cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that?
Oh, sorry. I said that Jacob Rees-Mogg he represents the primary audience base of the Conservative Party. He has quite socially conservative policies, and if you want to make sure that your vote goes towards someone who's socially liberal and economically liberal, you might as well just vote Labour.
Yeah, that's quite interesting to think about. Like, with the Republican Party, like right now in the US, because everyone makes this comparison, like, how you have the very much more Trump side and a more traditional Republican, and of course you have more moderate liberal Republicans. And I feel like that's very interesting to hear from the Conservatives. And it is generally something that to think about. Like, we always focus on like American politics, and especially how it relates to Hong Kong. But I feel like British politics, like not just with Hong Kong, but in general, we should pay a lot of close attention. Like, Britain is one of the closest allies to America at the moment, and they are still a world leader in geopolitics. So it would be interesting. And I feel like the same can go with France. It's also still a member of the Security Council. Just how these democracies are going to respond to the Chinese threat and how they change with the constant movement of geopolitics. And like yes, America. So what are you saying?
I was going to say I still think we should focus more on the politics of the United States over the UK. I mean, they are the world's, as much as anti-American sentiment has spread throughout the world after the Iraq War and the consequences after that, we still have to remember that they're the country to beat, to emulate. They're the ones who no matter what, for the rest of history, I'm confident that they're the ones who are going to be the global trendsetters in geopolitics. So I still think we should be paying attention more towards them than the UK. And on top of that, you don't necessarily have to limit the worldview to the Security Council as a whole. There are several emerging powers, India, Germany, Japan, Taiwan, who we should also be paying attention to, in addition to these countries, as they're probably going to be the ones who are going to be helping us, who are going to be helping Hong Kong the most.
Yeah, I should have clarified. I was just trying to focus on the Security Council for the most part. But I was going to talk about, how other countries are going to, we should also take note of them. Like, a lot of people have been ignoring, like, apart from maybe Taiwan, like Hong Kong really only pay attention, like, love Hong really pay attention to American and with a slight tinge of British politics. I feel like that's quite disappointing because there are a lot of countries that are focusing on trying to help Hong Kong. There are lawmakers, prominent lawmakers that are trying to like this isn't just limited to Five Eyes. It is the Interparliamentary Alliance, which consists of countries across the globe, mostly in the West, yes, but some, including Japan and I believe Uganda, who are also taking like they have lawmakers that are taking sides up to China, like they're standing up. I find it very interesting to like expand the world because the average Hong Konger doesn't really have a very like their understanding of geopolitics is mostly limited to East Asia and America and maybe the UK at times, as like you said. And I feel like if more Hong Kongers just expand their worldview, I feel like they can understand and collect their allies while also establishing communication links with them. And like for example, Denmark isn't a major player in geopolitics, and I don't think it will be for a while. But it I believe it gave refuge to Ted Hui and his family, and also there are a lot of lawmakers in Denmark which are supporting Hong Kong and are trying to like lobby in their own equivalent of parliament. I don't remember if it's called parliament, but anyways, like I believe like a lot of countries in the EU are trying to lobby the EU as a whole to try and move against China. We have to remind ourselves that the EU, like when combined, it can do a lot of good, and I hope that these lawmakers can first, try to change the popular and political opinion of these countries in favor of Hong Kong against China, and then soon they can move up to the European Union and just try and lobby against, try and lobby and for anti-China policies and trying to, put pressure on the CCP. And I believe that this, like China as a whole, it's because of it's a trade partner. Like without if it loses the support of the West, like financially and economically, it would do a lot of harm. Like obviously, they're taking a lot of big risk. Like I'm not saying that China's going to start a war over that, but there will still be economic consequences, and I can understand those that are reluctant. But the problem is there are people actively being persecuted by the CCP. We have, of course, we mentioned the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the Tibetan Tibet. You also have the Mongolians, the Hui, and also other ethnic groups which are also facing persecution from China. And you also have us Hong Kongers here in Hong Kong, the ordinary Chinese public, which are mostly indoctrinated or are too or fear to speak up against the government. And of course, there's Taiwan, which is living in fear of China. There's always this fear of China, of the Chinese invasion. Like, yeah, and I feel like human lives are much more important than economy. Like, economy is important, but is it worth risking human lives over? I don't think so. So, conclusion: the UK and the rest of Europe and the West and the entire world needs to stand up. I believe that we need to see bipartisan support, like proper, active, and most of all, beneficial support on both sides of the spectrum in different political countries. I know a lot of countries don't really fit into the left and right spectrum, and we need these countries to just turn the tide of political opinion so they can make a stand against China, because once China loses once China is no longer appealing from an economic standpoint, it would do a lot of damage to the country, like to China, like to the CCP, like the people supporting the CCP. It will drop if economic these economic issues are. Of course, it won't happen in one night or even 1 year, but gradually, as more and more countries put more strong viewpoints in China, I believe that we have a fighting chance. Sorry for getting so off topic. I'm sorry. We were talking about the UK.
No, yeah, you raised some really good points about the need for international support, but I think we need to isolate where that international support is going to come from. It's not going to come from the governments lobbying their own support. It's going to come from the people lobbying their support for Hong Kong towards their government. I mean, domestic policy and domestic support is always going to be the basis for foreign policy and foreign support. I mean, America goes to war with Iraq because of 9/11. They invade Afghanistan and Iraq, and that whole mess was created because of an incident which happened to them and affected them, their people, personally. They didn't do it for their own, for the benefit of the people at the top. They did it for the benefit of the people at the bottom. Well, I say benefit, air quotes, benefit. So that's the people that Hong Kongers really have to get towards. They have to get the people to stop purchasing cheap Chinese products which are made with slave labor. They have to kind of wean them off that, because it is heroin, essentially, isn't it? It's the heroin of geopolitics, cheap imports from a country which is more than happy to export resources. And then the second question, which countries will have to ask themselves, is where do they go next? If not China, where do we go next? Where's another country which has loose labor laws, which is open to free trade, where we can produce our goods cheaply and import them back to our home country so that our people can enjoy them? India has been suggested as an alternative, but as we're seeing right now with the farmers' protests, with Narendra Modi's nationalist government and their policies towards Muslim minority citizens in India, they're also having they're also engaging in some human rights violations there, and oppressing their own people. So while it seems, while there are solutions, they aren't exactly clear, and they may always present possible other problems which need to be answered. There's never going to be a yes and no answer when it comes to these problems. Do I think that these governments are going to give us our support? Yes, I think they are in the future. As you know, these socially liberal policies, because it is a socially liberal policy, appealing China and getting yourself away from these cheap exports, which have come about due to globalization and free trade, that as future generations become the ones who start voting and electing politicians into power, the world will have that base of people who can lobby their own governments to lobby for support in Hong Kong. We may even see the same thing in China. We may see a young, reformist-minded politician come to be the top dog in the Chinese government, who may end up being quite liberal and opening up the country, and maybe even allowing multi-party elections in the future, maybe 60, 70 years from now. So I am optimistic. Be optimistic.
I am also optimistic, but I just want to make a joke that, I just want to make a joke. I made this with friends, I don't know if I told you, but deep, I have a conspiracy theory that Xi Jinping, they have a mecha Xi Jinping, they have clothes ready for him so he can live eternally for 1,000 years, and, it's obviously a joke. It's obviously a joke, but,
Never.
know.
I wouldn't put it past him. I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah. So we're just gonna start. We're just gonna end the podcast very soon. I just want to say a big thank you for James for coming on to this podcast. It's been wonderful having you here.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime.
And yes, I just want to give a little message to the rest of the people who are hopefully listening to this. I just want to talk about something important that's gonna come with the page. Like last episode, I mentioned that this page is gonna change a lot during the summer. Like, of course, nothing drastic changes, but I just want to bring to everyone's attention that in the future there are going to be times where I won't be as how to say this. I won't be as online as I am, and I am pretty active on the page. But in the future, I just want to tell everyone that expect more breaks for different reasons. And I don't know, I can't really predict the future. Like maybe a few years from now, Hongkongggag won't even exist. Maybe it would just suddenly blow up by a lot. I have no idea, but I just want to give this message that, in case I do take a break, and this shouldn't be so surprising. I don't know. I'm trying to say. All right, thank you, James, for coming on, and I will see you guys next episode.